me while I turn the recording on. Okay, there we go. So Schedule C of your 2019 tax return, line 31, is where you'll figure out whether or not you're eligible, because the first step is to have this form completed. And if line 31 is $2,400 or more, that's $2,400 or better, you are eligible to apply. Any questions on that so far? Okay. How you apply is that same line 31, or excuse me, how you calculate the amount that you're eligible for is that same line 31, right? So whatever line 31 is on your 2019 Schedule C, you will divide that number by 12 and then multiply that answer by 2.5. Because what the government has said is we're going to give you a loan equivalent to 2.5 months your quote unquote salary. And for independent contractors, that is 2.5 months of your net profit. So if your number there was $75,000 last year, now before you start making a whole bunch of calculations, those of you whose number is over $100,000, there's a caveat for you. So let's just do an example of the math. So if your number was $75,000, you're going to divide $75,000 by 12, which is $6,250, and multiply that by 2.5. So your loan would be $15,625, right? For those of you who earned over, your net profit was over $100,000 last year, that's the max. The max the government will allow is $100,000 of income to be used in this calculation. So there were a whole lot of loans made across the country for $20,833, because if you max over that 100,000 divided by 12 multiplied by 2.5 is 20,833. Everyone's with me so far? So if you have questions, you can unmute yourselves, by the way. Everyone's muted, but you can unmute yourselves if you have a question, or pop it in the chat. Actually, there is something in the chat. Let me just check it. Sophie, I'm not sure I understand the question. Anything written in terms of dollar requirement? Or did I answer it already? So Erica's question, a way to apply with a K1 instead of a Schedule C. It depends on how you're applying. If you're applying for a corporation, well, the corporation would then apply, right? So if you receive owner profits from a company, you could apply, that company could apply utilizing that K1 as a payment to an owner. That's how you would use K1s instead of Schedule C. Okay, so we're right up to the point of now figuring out of getting that money in place, right? So that's the calculation for you. I want you to hang in because I know this gets confusing after a while. So Lori's question is this additional income that you must claim next year on your taxes? The answer to that so far is we're not 100% sure. What the SBA has said is that they do not, if the loan is forgiven, that they're not going to count it as income, taxable income. Except what the IRS has said is that, well, that's all well and fine, except anything that they pay with the PPP funds won't be deductible, which is exactly the same way as saying that the money is taxable. So if you're taxing the money, we're not allowing the deductions for what the money actually purchases. It's kind of the same thing. And so with the passage of the PPPFA on June the 3rd, which was the Flexibility Act, right, the secondary portion of this conversation, what they're saying right now is kind of wait and see. They're not 100% sure how this is all going to play out in terms of whether it's taxable or not. So Violetta, if your net profit is more than 100K, you can't file. No, if your net profit is more than $100,000, you can only use $100,000 as your base number, right? That's a great question. Thank you for that, right? So if you earned $300,000 last year, you can't divide 300,000 divided by 12, multiply by 2.5. They'll deny that amount, right? Or worse, they'll grant you that amount and you'll spend that amount, but only a certain small portion of it's going to be forgiven, right? So now you've taken a loan that maybe you don't need, right? So how you are eligible over 100,000 is to pretend line 31 said $100,000 and do the math off of $100,000. Where do you go? For those of you who have not applied, you're kind of in luck at this point in time because the huge crunch of people who applied is over, right? And so a lot of banks, if your bank was telling you at the time, we're not accepting applications any longer, that's probably not the case anymore. So if your bank is affiliated with the SBA and a quick phone call to them would answer that, they may be able to accept your application. I know a whole bunch of our agents went online and they applied at a place called Kabbage.com. That's cabbage with K.com. So that homepage looks like this. Yep, that page looks like this. And you go up here to PPP loans, and then it gives you info and applications and the whole process. We've had a whole lot of people, even when the big banks and local smaller banks were so overwhelmed, we had a lot of people that we were able to funnel to this online lender, this Kabbage.com lender. They are SBA authorized, and they were able to take the application pretty simply online, and our people got funded. So this is certainly a simple path. If you're more of a sit and talk to somebody person, again, call your bank. Tell them that you're now looking to apply for a PPP loan. Are they affiliated with the SBA, and can they send you their application? I personally have not applied on through Kabbage, but I've helped people apply through Kabbage. And right here on that page, it says make sure you have the right documents ready. If you click on that sucker and then click down here, you're an independent contractor, right? It gives you a list of the things that you'll need, right? So if you have employees, you need this. If you don't have employees, you need these things over here. Again, it's pretty simple. And they make it relatively easy. Question in the chat, let me see. Will they do a credit check like a regular loan? No. No, they will not do a credit check. That is not my understanding. You don't, it's not guaranteed in any way. They don't do a credit check because these funds are guaranteed. Based on your income. So go to Kabbage.com and check out some more information if you're looking for a better, more of a read than what I'm giving you today. So Laura asks if you're W-2, are you disqualified? So W-2 employees, your opportunity through all of this was if you had lost your job to file for unemployment, and then the federal side of unemployment was going to boost your opportunities. If you're W-2 and independent contractor, so if 2019 you had independent contractor income and you were a W-2 employee, my understanding of that, don't hold me to this because I haven't given you my disclaimer yet, right? I'm just a guy who's looking to help you obtain some funds. I am not a financial planner. I'm not an accountant. I don't work for the SBA. I don't have an in with the CARES Act, right? I've done so much of this and read so much information on it that I wanted to make that available to you. So Laura, my understanding is that if you were both, It's based on your 2019 Schedule C. So if your 2019 Schedule C was over $2,400, you are eligible for whatever that portion of your income was independent contractor related. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thanks, Rick.
Okay, cool. Mary, I'm going to answer that question in a second. Give me some time on that one because it speaks to expenses, and I want to continue on the income side. The other thing to remember, if you need or want more information, is to go to SBA.gov. Right, when you go to SBA.gov, there's a whole section. There's a whole section. If you click on the coronavirus loan resources and then funding options. One of the funding options here, as you can see, click here to learn more about SBA loans. And the funding option here is the Paycheck Protection Program. That's the one we're speaking about today, is the PPP, right? And so you get a whole lot of information about that program. If you want to continue to read more after we're finished here today, you can certainly check that out. Now, there is an application at this site. However, you need to also speak to the lender that you're going to be going through, because this is administered by the SBA, but it's funneled through local banks, right? So your local bank may only ask you for the SBA app, or they may have additional papers. When I did it for my businesses, there was the SBA application, which I had to do for each of the businesses, but then there was also a couple of pages that the bank wanted for their purposes. So you have to speak to whoever it is you're applying through. If you're applying through Cabbage, okay. So this has been a whole lot of information about numbers and whatnot, and I know we need a break every once in a while. So Laura, would you do me a favor? Would you drink again? I want you all to see this. Just a second. Go ahead. Just drink.
Like you.
Okay. So if anyone is really, really thirsty, this is how Laura solves that problem, you see. She drinks from a gallon jug of water. And if anybody has a leaking pool, give Laura a call, because she can come over and kind of fill your pool and still have enough to drink for the entire rest of the day.
It's a motivative jug. Do you see this? Good morning. You got this. Remember your goal.
I love it. I love it.
Gets me through. I drink my water.
I love that. Okay, so sorry to distract, but I saw that out of the corner of my eye and thought, holy crap, that is the largest water bottle I think I've ever seen in my entire life. So let's answer some questions here. Do you know the difference between the PPP loan and the SBA loan? If yes, can you apply for both? So the answer to that is yes. Again, if you meet your PPP requirements with Schedule C, you can also apply for an EIDL, right, which is the SBA loan version of this. If you didn't apply for an EIDL advance back in the beginning, those kind of free $1,000 is that they were giving out, that's all gone. So you kind of missed the boat on that. But if you applied, it doesn't really much matter if you missed the boat, because if you applied for PPP and you got an EIDL $1,000 advance, when you apply for the forgiveness on the PPP forms, you have to add that $1,000 you received to the loan amount for the PPP. You can't double dip. So one way or the other, you were kind of paying that $1,000 back if it wasn't all forgiven. But my understanding is that you can apply for both, because they are separate, and the SBA loan, the EIDL loan, is a flat out loan. There is no forgiveness to that side of it, right? It's a loan that they decide how much you're qualified for based on the information that you give. It's a 3 3/4% for 15 or 20 years, something like that. And so it's just a loan, right, to get you through. It's a guaranteed loan that you don't have to collateralize at all, but it is a loan. The PPP is an SBA loan that comes with a massive amount of forgiveness if in fact you work it right? So if you're choosing one or the other, the PPP is the better path to go. depending on your numbers, right, on your Schedule C, you may get a little more if you apply for an SBA loan, but none of it will be forgiven. So that you have to kind of look at your finances and see what makes sense there. What if you made very little or no money and were a new agent? Is there help? Yeah, unfortunately, other than unemployment, that there isn't, because if your Schedule C line 31 was not over $2,400, you're ineligible. If it was over $2,400 and it was minimal, say it was $10,000, your opportunity is $10,000, or say it was $12,000 to make the math easy, right? $12,000 divided by 12 is $1,000, multiplied by 2.5 months is $2,500. So you're eligible for a $2,500 PPP, right? Now, what I would say to you is, if that's you, $2,500 that is likely to be forgiven is more money than $0, and so why not apply for it anyway? I think that there's opportunity there, but there's not as much opportunity as if you made more. When do we apply for the forgiveness? Immediately afterwards? No, Kim, I'm going to hold that question for a second with Mary's question. I'm going to get there. If you share business expenses and contribute to a savings account on a monthly basis to pay off all your bills, how do you prove your business expense to get forgiveness? Todd, I'm going to hold that for forgiveness as well. Give me just a second, I'll get there. And Bogdan, yes, it's 3 3/4 for 30 years. Thank you for that clarity. Okay. So now you're up to the point of applying, either through your bank or through Cabbage, with your documents, with your Schedule C, with your line 31, with your math all done, right? Right. For many of you who made over $100,000, again, your amount's going to be $20,833 because you're capped. Once they approve you, the approval process should be relatively short nowadays, because the reason there's all this surplus is that people stopped applying, right? Now, that's locally. In other parts of the country where this is all heating up, they may be seeing spikes in applications, but the good news for you is we're kind of in that steady eddy to decline version of this whole experience, at least today. Keep your fingers crossed. So you shouldn't see a whole backlog locally with banks, and the SBA is pretty much just making sure the local banks have done their job and stamping the approval and getting back. Once you're notified that you're approved, it generally takes a week to 10 days for them to fund the loan. You may have to open a new account to have the loan funded if you use a bank that is not your primary bank. They may ask you to open an account to dump the money into it. I had 3 of mine fund into normal banks, and I had to open another one to make sure that it went into the right place. Once the funds are received, my understanding, so Laura's question, if you file jointly, there should just be one Schedule C then, right? Right? I don't think you get 2 Schedule Cs, although you might. You might get 2 Schedule Cs.
Rick.
So the loan is going to be individual, right? And so if one is above and one is below, the one who is below is ineligible. Again, I would absolutely verify this information with the bank people that you talk to. But my understanding is that because these are individual loans, that one would be okay and one would not be okay.
Rick, I was just going to clarify that each business is going to have its own Schedule C, because I have 2 of them for myself. So each one will have its own. So one that says Keller Williams has its own Schedule C, so there should be more than one.
Got it. Now, the good news is if you run more than one business and you have 2 Schedule Cs, you can likely, again, speak to your banker. You may be able to combine the Schedule Cs or file 2 applications, one for each Schedule C that is eligible, right? But again, talk to your banker about exactly how that would work. Once you receive the funds, so that's kind of the fun. But any conversation about eligibility or how you go about filing for this loan? Going once. Going twice. I'm going to say something that may be unpopular, and I'm okay with it being unpopular. I was speaking to somebody the other day who said, I feel funny applying for these funds because I could certainly use them, but I'm certainly not going to eat, right? If I don't apply for them. And I was speaking to somebody else on this. I was speaking, do you know Brian Fair? He's our regional operating partner. He owns the region that we belong to. And I was speaking to him on Friday, and we were having this conversation, and he said, it's funny because I've heard a lot about that same kind of thought process. I've had the same conversation with myself. I'll tell you, I've had the conversation with myself personally. And my answer to that is there will be one time in your entire lifetime that the government says, hey, want some money and we'll forgive it and you don't have to pay it back? This is that time. It will not happen again in our lifetime. So there's an offer on the table. I'm not sure I see a reason why, if you're eligible, you shouldn't take advantage of that offer, right? The government certainly asks you to pay your taxes every single year, right? And you do that dutifully. This is an opportunity to say, you know what, I am a business owner, and did I struggle for 3 months? Was my income affected? Might it be? Because here's the other side of this. Even if your business was not as affected as you thought, because I will tell you personally, my businesses were not as badly affected as I thought they were going to be. I applied for 4 different PPP loans for each of the 4 businesses that qualified, and I received funds for each of them. I've used the funds for each of them. I will apply for forgiveness for each of those 4. And I don't feel badly about it, simply because even though I didn't 110% need them in the last few months, I have no idea what's coming down the road. And neither do you. You don't know what September looks like. You don't know what November looks like. What if this doesn't ever go away and just gets worse? What if it comes back to the New York tri-state area with a vengeance? What if we're gearing up for a second shutdown, right? So what I would say to you is take the mindset, have the mindset here of, I need to be prepared. If I didn't necessarily need it retroactively going backwards, if I'm not in a bind right now, I need to be prepared for what might be coming. Does that help with some of the head games that we play with ourselves? Because if you're anything like me, you're doing those same kind of head games of, I feel I should leave this for the people who really need it. Well, you don't know if you're one of those people or not yet, right? You don't know. And so I would say, grab these if you're eligible and utilize them and save your cash if the government is willing to assist you right now. So the money gets deposited. Now let's just talk quickly about the next steps of this. The money gets deposited. You right now have 24 weeks to utilize the funds that get deposited into your account from the day, literally the day they arrive. That's when the clock starts ticking. Many of you know that the old version of this was 8 weeks, right? When this first got released, it was 8 weeks. And until June 3rd, it was 8 weeks. You had 8 weeks to use it. They came back and said, we're going to extend that for 24 weeks or December 31st, whichever comes first. Right? We're right now into that time period where you won't get your money. If you apply today, you won't get your funds with 24 weeks left on the year. That won't happen for you, because I think we're kind of right now is about 24 weeks. So you'll be less than 24 weeks. You'll have 23, 22, maybe 21 weeks, right? To utilize the funds. Here's how you utilize the funds. The new rules say 60% or more have to be utilized for payroll. For you, that is going to be right back to your Schedule C, line 31. That's how you determine your payroll. The funky part about this is that most of you as independent contractors, you don't pay rent, right? Or a business mortgage. And so the other two big chunks that this money was able to be used for was either business rent or paying a business mortgage. Now, by the way, business mortgage, if for some reason that applies to you, any principal payments are not included in that. It's only the interest side of the mortgage payment. The government's not going to pay down your loan. They're just going to pay the interest on it, right? So most of you don't have that. Most of you don't have rent that you pay or a business mortgage that you can prove was in existence prior to February 15th and is 100% utilized for your business. Now, you may have accountants or bankers who say you can maybe use some version of your home office expenses. If you go back to Schedule C, just lines 29 and 30 talk about a home business expense, right? So you may be able to use some of those funds and ask for forgiveness on those. I make no guarantees as to whether or not they'll be approved, right? Because utility payments are also, business utility payments are also part of what can be forgiven. And most of you don't have a utility in your business's name, right? Now that might be, your cell phone might be a part of that, might be available. You might, if you have car payments, the interest on those car payments may be available because transportation is part of utilities. Again, this is all kind of fast forwarding to how you use the money and the forgiveness piece. And I don't want to confuse you around all of that. But the things that you're able to use this money for are salaries, business rent or business mortgage, or utilities, business-related utilities. That's it. Somebody said to me the other day, well, somebody told me that if I'm eligible for the money, the government can't tell me how to use it. Well, that is absolutely true if you're not interested in forgiveness of the loan. It's absolutely false if you're interested in forgiveness. They can absolutely tell you how to use these funds. The difference is if you're using it as payroll and you write yourself a check for $5,000 for payroll for July or for August, well, how you use your payroll funds is completely up to you, right? But the forgiveness piece says, I wrote a check from the PPP funds to pay my salary. Does that make sense? You see the difference there? Okay. Here's the tricky part. And some of it, you're going to have to trust that this will become clearer as time goes on, because it is not clear right now. Under the old rules, you were eligible for forgiveness at the salary level for 8 50-seconds, that's 8 over 52, of your annual salary. That was $100,000 or less. And so here's what that means. The government was saying, okay, for the 8 weeks because the original rule said this money was good for 8 weeks. For the 8 weeks that they're using it, that amount that they would have received based on an annualized version of their income, right? There's 52 weeks in the year, so 8 weeks out of 52 weeks was the calculation. And you were maxed. So if you were a $100,000 or more earner, your max was $15,385, right? Because 8 50-seconds of $100,000 is $15,385. Now, when they moved the calculation, when they moved the time period to 24 weeks or up to 24 weeks, it was unclear in the new legislation. I know that's very surprising to you that the government was not clear. It was unclear in the legislation that they passed if they would also move that metric of 8 50-seconds to 24 50-seconds. And no one has made a ruling on that yet. So what I encourage you to do is, if you file this, when the money is received in your bank account, I would divide that money by 8 weeks. Let me restate that. When the money arrives, I would look at your Schedule C and calculate 850 seconds of your Schedule C. So if your Schedule C was, remember, if your Schedule C was more than $100,000, you're capped at 100. So you likely got a $20,833 loan because it was based on 2.5 months, maxed at $100,000. However, you see where I'm headed here? You see the problem? If you got 20,800 and they don't change the rule and you're eligible for payroll expenses up to 850 seconds of your Schedule C line 31, 850 seconds of your $100,000 a year is only $15,385. So if you disperse all 20,833 over 8 weeks as payroll expenses and they don't change the rule, you're only allowed to ask for forgiveness up to 850 seconds of that, which is $15,385. Are you sufficiently confused yet? Right? So here's my point to you. Just because you received X amount of funds doesn't mean that X amount of funds will automatically be forgiven, even if you follow all the rules, because there are caps on things. So what you can do, what I encourage you to do, is until the rules change, and as soon as they do, I will let everybody know, until the rules change or there's clarification or guidance that they're extending that 850 seconds rule to something longer, I would receive your funds, figure out what that 850 seconds rule says your forgivable amount of salary is, and then divide that number by 8. And weekly, pay yourself that amount of money. So again, for somebody over $100,000, your loan is probably $20,800. Your max forgiveness on payroll is $15,385. Divide $15,385 by 8 weeks and issue yourself a check. It's like $1,900 a week for 8 weeks, and that's your salary. You'll then have leftover, right? You'll have about $6,000 left over. If they change the rule, well, then you can just keep going and disperse the leftover throughout the rest of the 24, 22, 21 weeks, whatever that you have. But I don't want you to write yourself checks based on the funded amount if that amount is not going to be forgiven based on the current rules. Now, if you need the funds to eat, well, then I encourage you to write yourself a check for the leftover funds and feed your family. Just know that differential might not be forgiven. You may take that as a loan that may have to be repaid. Those loans right now are 1% over 2 to 5 years, depending on the rule that you read. And payments are deferred, I think, for 12 months. Right? So you have some time. But what I encourage you to do is recognize that if you don't need those funds and you're only going to use the funds that are forgiven, save those other funds in the bank. And as soon as you apply for forgiveness and get forgiveness for your payroll expenses, give the other stuff back. Don't take a loan and start paying interest on it, even at 1%, if you don't really need the funds, right? Now, again, those other opportunities to close the gap, I'm still working on. One of my businesses personally is all kind of owner profit. So it's all this Schedule C or K1 stuff. And that business doesn't have rent. It doesn't have lease payments. It doesn't have, utility costs. And so I'm still working on if they don't extend the salary metric from 850 seconds to something like 2450 seconds or until you use the funds, how can I close the gap? If I can't close the gap, I have about a $12,000 gap between what I know will be forgiven under the current rules and what I got. That's just sitting there, and I'll just give that back. All right, a couple of questions I want to get to. Are you eligible if you're filing weekly for PUA unemployment? Let me get back to that, Faye, in a second. So if you're working from home and don't use a home deduction, I don't have employees and can't use my personal utilities, I'm not eligible for forgiveness. You're not eligible for forgiveness for anything other than the salary portion. So if you use, Mary, 100% of the funds, if 100% of the funds you receive can be used for salary, and they extend that use period to more than 850 seconds, well, then you can use 100% of that for a salary. If they keep it at 850 seconds, your loan is probably larger than what you're able to have forgiven from a salary perspective. So you would have to do the 850 seconds rule, pay yourself for 8 weeks, and then give back that other money, or keep it as a loan. Kim, does the government look at our accounting as to how we pay ourselves, bank records, et cetera? So again, that continues to remain relatively unclear. The first round of forgiveness paperwork that Paul and I were working off of is 14 pages long. It's a ridiculous amount of documentation. However, all of this was issued before they passed the PPPFA, right? So now we're waiting for new forgiveness documents. So we're not 110% sure what they're going to ask for. We encourage a separate bank account. We encourage writing of checks per pay period, so that you have something to show that you wrote a check from one account to pay yourself. We encourage, if you're not getting checks for that new account, separate transfers to show weekly pay periods, right? That kind of thing. So that there's enough documentation when they ask for it to say, this is how we used the funds. Here's where it went. This is the Schedule C to balance, to show you that 850 seconds of this divided, so weekly it would have been this, and that's the total.
Rick,
Yes.
I mentioned this the last time we talked together as a group. If you're using QuickBooks and you have a normal line item called salary that you use to pay yourself, then you should go into QuickBooks and create a new account and call it salary-PPP. And when you write those checks, use that account so that you can actually break it up in your QuickBooks as salary and salary-PPP.
Love that idea. Thank you, Paul, for that. Right. So the tracking is important to make sure that you have what you need when the forgiveness forms come out. Of course, it's a little ridiculous. I mean, Kim asked the question, what should I track? Well, the forgiveness forms aren't available for this particular version yet. So we're going off of best guesses. And yet my advice to you, Paul's advice to you, over track. Right? If you're a little loosey-goosey in your financial world, business or personal, normally, don't be loosey-goosey here. Over track. Write a check if you can transfer the funds internally, write a check anyway, so that you also have a piece of paper to print out and attach to your forgiveness saying, here's the check from the PPP funds to my business account, right, to pay my salary, that kind of thing. Lori asks, can you use funds for salary and interest on a car loan, right? So if the answer is potentially, right? So if your overage from your salary funds, if you max that on your salary funds at the 15,385 or the 850 seconds, depending on how that works for you, if you earned under $100,000, business transportation is one of the utilities that is covered. Again, it will not cover principal on anything. It only covers interest on those things. I know a bunch of people are putting the whole payment down. You can do that, just don't be surprised if they come back and say how much of this was principal, how much of it was interest, because the only thing that's actually forgivable if somebody's looking at it and asking the question is the interest portion. So Laura, you could, if you can prove you use your car in business, right? And your accountant files your tax returns as, just say you use your car 75% for business. Well, then 75% of the interest on the car loans for the period of time that you're covering using these funds could be submitted as part of the forgiveness application. Yes, sir.
Now, the only thing I want to mention there is for those of you who lease a car, that's different than those of you who are purchasing a car. So a purchase has principal and interest in it, but a lease is all rent. It's the depreciation. So you should be able to find out that the entire lease portion is forgivable and should be, and again, this is another category where if you paid your lease payments in January, February, and March, you should start a new category called lease for your car and put lease-PPP so that you can come back at it later and indicate, yes, those were payments to my car, transportation.
Yeah, it's a great point, Paul. Right, so lease versus own. If you own the car and you're paying it off, the principal will not count, but a lease payment is all just a utility payment. So great point. Also, please note, I know how confusing this whole forgiveness thing is. The only reason I went into it is to help you understand how to manage the funds once you receive them. Once we're through the next couple of months and the forgiveness starts to happen, again, we don't even have the forms yet, right? The right forms to apply for forgiveness yet. Once that happens, we will go through it a bunch of times and we'll get everybody back on Zoom. If we go through it one by one with each of you, I'll do it one by one with each of you to make sure that you're getting the maximum forgiveness possible. I'm happy to spend that time doing that because I want to make sure that you've used the funds, you're getting forgiveness for the funds that you've received. Without some knowledge, however, going into how to use the funds, it may be hard to go back in time and say, okay, now use the funds as if it were July, right? So that's why we're having this part of the conversation, right? So you don't have to be an expert right now about how to apply for forgiveness because nobody is. Nobody quite yet knows how that's going to work. Here's my hope. What occurred in early May, I hope will occur in the fall as well. And what occurred in early May or mid-May is that the government came back and said, okay, anybody who received funds less than $2 million is automatically approved to have met the need criteria. Which means if you're applying for less than 2 million or you've received less than 2 million, you don't have to worry about anybody at the government level saying, are you certain you needed these? They have already made that determination for you. If you applied for the funds, they've given you a pass on the absolute need because you applied for less than 2 million. If anybody on the call is applying for more than 2 million, please call me afterwards because I want to know how you did that. We need to have conversations around how and why your need was so great and what kind of business you built that required $2 million or over $2 million in PPP funds. I am now all ears, right? And so what my hope is that we get to a point that the government realizes how ridiculously complicated and convoluted to all of this is and issues another rule that says, you know what, anybody who received less than $2 million, it's just all forgiven. Just, happy health crisis, right? I don't know that that'll happen, and yet I keep crossing my fingers, right? So that they'll make the nightmare of all this forgiveness stuff go away. Because it's not just going to be a nightmare for you and for me. It's going to be a nightmare for every single bank in the country that issued these funds and for the SBA. I mean, we're talking about tens of millions of loans that have to be now reviewed and issued for forgiveness for principal, interest, 60%, 40%. I mean, it's ridiculous. So keep your fingers crossed. Maybe that'll happen. Until then, Until then, use the funds knowing that as independent contractors, you would minimally have 850 seconds of your Schedule C, line 51, as forgivable money, plus whatever we can kind of figure out and add in from a utility perspective. You and your accountant or your banker may get more creative than that. I know some people who are attempting to utilize, as I said, portions of home business, home offices, right? So portions of the rent you pay at home because you use it as a home office, or you did for the time period, and for 2020's tax return, you're going to file for a home office. Again, all of that I will leave to people who way smarter than me to determine whether you should or should not include that. And maybe by the time we get to the forgiveness conversation in the fall or early winter, we'll know better about how the government will look at that, and we can guide you a little bit better. But until then, know that you may have a delta between what's forgiven and what's given. Know that minimally, under today's rules, once you receive the money, if you take 850 seconds of your Schedule C, line 31, and divide that by 8 weeks and write yourself a check each week for that amount, you should be okay with that as your forgivable salary portion. And for all of you who do the 850 seconds rule, that will be over the 60% threshold, so you don't have to worry. Mathematically, it's impossible for it not to meet the 850 seconds threshold. Right, the old rule was 75%. At least 75% of your money had to be used for payroll. And mathematically, we kept running short because they gave us enough for 2.5 months, but we're only forgiving 8 weeks, right? And 2.5 months is more like 10 or 11 weeks. Now that they've dropped that requirement to 60%, it's mathematically impossible for you to not have, to not meet that threshold of at least 60% being salary-based. So that was a whole lot I just threw at you. I want to use any remaining time to answer any questions. Here's my hope before you unmute. Here's my hope. My hope is that what you did was hear that you have a right to apply for this. And so knowing that you have a right to apply for it, go for it, right? Know how to do it and then go for it. Let me answer a question about unemployment, because some of you did take care of unemployment as well. If you're still on unemployment, so can you apply for unemployment and receive unemployment and receive PPP funds at the same time? The answer is yes. However, you just cannot in any given week double dip. So if you're writing 8 weeks of salary checks from the PPP funds that you've received, in those 8 weeks, when you file for unemployment every week, you have to answer the questions: did you work? Did you make any money? Well, if you wrote yourself a salary check from PPP funds that week, well, you made money that week. You have to report those funds. Generally speaking, for most of you, those funds that you write yourself a check for in that week will eliminate any unemployment that you get for that week. So you can be on unemployment and receive PPP funds. You just can't get both of those funds in the same week. Does that help that answer that question? I can't remember who asked the question.
It was
Right?
me, and yes, Rick, that answers it perfectly. Thank you.
Excellent. So if you applied for unemployment and you've been filing and receiving unemployment, you can apply for PPP and just report in each of those 8 weeks that you're receiving money, right? And then when the PPP funds run out, if you're still eligible for additional unemployment funds, you can continue to report unemployment funds after the 8 weeks of PPP salary is paid. You can't double dip. Will the SBA be forgivable? Is there a form for that too? The SBA loans are not forgivable. SBA loans, on the other side, the EIDL loans, they're not forgivable, right? Including if you received an EIDL advance, right? Some of you received an advance. Most of you who got the advance was $1,000. It was promised at 10, it came through at 1, right? So $1,000, when you file for your forgiveness of your PPP, you have to add that $1,000 to the loan amount for your PPP. Because again, you can't double dip, get PPP funds and also have a forgivable $1,000 on the EIDL side. It was either or. So they will ask you to take that and put it on with the PPP funds. And so you may end up, because you receive PPP funds, you may end up giving the $1,000 EIDL loan back. If any of you have said yes to an EIDL SBA loan over and above that $1,000 advance, that is simply a loan. There is no forgivable version of that. There is no form, and there won't be, right? That's just a simple loan to help get you through at favorable rates with some deferment. Just note that deferments on payments for all this stuff, interest continues to accrue, right? From day one, right? So you don't have to make payments, but you're accruing interest. So the loan is actually going up. Even if you defer a year, the loan is going up until you start the payments.
Rick?
Any other questions? Yes, Mary.
With my question earlier, what I meant with that was when you were showing that cabbage page and said we needed our Schedule C. I don't know if it said 1099, but then it said receipts or invoice. You know, if I have, when they say they want to see an invoice showing, you know, that we were, you know, engaged in the work, showing the monthly KW invoice for March, does that meet it or?
So that's a great question. And because I haven't done cabbage myself personally, I'm not 100% sure what they're looking for there. What I would say, Mary, is, again, we've had a bunch of our agents go through cabbage and be approved. If they're looking for something, I think it will become clear as you go through the process. I haven't written a letter for anybody saying, yes, Mary is a licensed real estate agent engaged in the real estate business. I think that because these sites are built for everybody, some of those things just don't simply apply to our industry. And so, right, for those of you who are high Cs who like to check every box, right, you may not check every box. It may just not apply to you. So I would have your tax stuff, dive in, start going through the application, and if you get stuck, give me a shout and we can talk about what might solve the stuckness. But I don't believe that our agents have used anything for an invoice per se. So I would charge ahead just with your tax documents.
Do you think it'd be better for me to just go through my bank? Maybe would I get more clarification one-on-one with them?
So it is certainly possible that that might be a better path. You'll have somebody to talk to at least, right?
Okay.
I'll leave it to you guys as to which path you want to go down. Some of you work in banks that aren't connected with the SBA or are not doing this anymore, that type of thing. So have a conversation with your banker, and they may be able to point you in the right direction. What else? What other questions do you have? So for those of you who joined the call today who are not currently with our company, for those of you who are with our company, you know how to find me. I'm happy to help you in whatever way I can. If you need help on the application, if all of this made absolutely no sense to you and you watch it again after it's posted tomorrow and say, okay, it still doesn't make any sense, just text me and we'll do a one-on-one Zoom and I'll help you figure it out. For those of you who are on the call who are not part of our company, I'm happy to assist you in that same way. These funds are available for the real estate community, and it's important to me that you know how to access them. So just call the office, or I'll put my cell phone here in the chat box, or email me, and I'm happy to have a one-on-one conversation with you as well. Any other questions, comments, concerns about the PPP funds? Going once. Yes, Mary.
I just want to say thank you, Rick.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I thought you had a question. I'll end here. remember what I said earlier. Remember that the government has already said anyone receiving less than $2 million in a loan, right? And the answer to Violetta's question before, how do you get a $2 million loan? Well, if your tax returns support a $2 or $3 or $4 million loan, that's how you would get that. The max, because you're talking about multiple employees now. Small businesses, according to the SBA, are companies up to 499 employees, right? So you may well have payroll amounts over that amount. That's how it doesn't apply for solo independent contractors, because there is that $100,000 max. But that's how some companies may access larger funds, because they have large amounts of. I mean, let's be clear. The Los Angeles Lakers received PPP funding in that first round, right? They gave it back because they got a lot of crap for it. Chipotle got PPP funds, right? When those of us who were asking for like 50 grand or 20 grand are like sitting out in the cold, some of these people were getting millions of dollars. So that's all been corrected. That's how that works. Know that they've already said that you have the need if it's less than 2 million. And remember, taking these steps to prepare yourself for what might be coming, I think, is a smart business move. Trust me, I understand that some of you struggle with a handout, and this feels like a handout. I had more conversations and more arguments with my business partners around this in the beginning, because I really struggled with feeling like I was taking a handout. And at the same time, we had no idea how or if we were going to be able to keep our employees employed. And it was important to me that we weren't laying people off, right? And it should be important to you to make sure that you're protecting your business so that you don't have a version of a layoff inside of your own business, and that person is then you, right? You don't know what the fall and the winter are going to look like. So I would say, if these funds are still available, look at that as a sign, do what you have to do and apply, and I'm happy to help anyone who needs the help. Could we get a link in an email of the recording so that we can send to agents? And yes, so sure, Adonis will have this recording taken care of. Because we're doing that, I'll give my cell phone and my email address live. That's 203-247-3153. And it's rick.scott@kw.com. If you missed that, press rewind and you can hear it again when you're on the recording. And Jedna's question, did you say we have to go to a local bank to apply? Either a local bank or Cabbage, as we showed in the beginning, right? So start with your local bank. I think that's the easiest place because you have someone to talk to. And if you run into issues, you know where to find me. Guys, I hope this was helpful. Reach out if you need me. Have a lovely afternoon. We'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Rick.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Rick. Bye.